Welcome to our relationship, where Gabriella discovers that her best friend Grace didn't just want a guest room, a shoulder to cry on, and a little time to recover from her divorce. No, Grace wanted a spot in the marriage, emotional access to the husband, a permanent seat on the couch, and apparently a lifetime subscription to someone else's married life. And if you think that already sounds bad, breathe. Because here the word "our" starts as a joke and ends up sounding like a property claim. Our next Reddit post comes from Gabriella, a 33-year-old woman married to Graham, 35, for 6 years. Gabriella describes Graham as calm, helpful, and a little slow to notice certain things, which, in stories like this, usually means he didn't see the bomb because he was admiring the wrapping paper. They had a stable marriage. Not perfect, because perfect marriages only exist in margarine commercials and in the lives of people who post matching Christmas outfits, but it was good. They had routines, the dog, plans for children, and that domestic intimacy where you can tell by the sound of someone's keys whether they came home tired or just annoyed by traffic. Grace, Gabriella's best friend, was also 34, had recently divorced Gavin. Gavin cheated on Grace with a co-worker, lied for months, denied it until the universe got tired, then left the house saying he needed to find himself, of course. A man destroys a marriage and calls it a spiritual journey. Maybe he found his character at the bottom of a drawer, because it certainly never appeared in public. Grace was devastated. She cried all the time, barely ate, sent 8-minute voice notes at 2 in the morning, and said she felt like her life had been ripped away from her by hand. Gabriella, being a decent friend, offered her the guest room for a few weeks. A few weeks. That small, innocent phrase that walks into your house wearing slippers and, when you blink, is choosing curtains, reorganizing the fridge, and calling your husband ours. At first, it was exactly what Gabriella expected. Grace left a lot, cried on the couch, watched terrible shows, drank cheap wine, and said she would never trust another man again. Graham was kind. He made coffee, asked if Grace needed anything, fixed the guest room doorknob, carried boxes, and installed a small shelf so she could put her books and medicine somewhere. Nothing major, just basic humanity. Except some people confuse basic humanity with an emotional contract signed in an imaginary courthouse. The first time Gabriella felt something was off happened on a Sunday. Graham was in the laundry room trying to install a shelf. Grace appeared with a mug in her hand, leaned against the doorway, and said with a smile, "Look at that. Our husband is so useful." Gabriella laughed because it sounded like a joke. Graham laughed too. That short laugh men do when they don't know if they just heard a joke or got served legal papers. Grace added, "I'm kidding. I know he's yours. For now. There it is. The first little rat running across the kitchen floor of this story. You see it, think it's disgusting, but tell yourself, maybe it came in from outside. No. Sweetheart, the nest is already behind the fridge." Gabriella asked, "What do you mean, for now?" Grace made an offended face, like Gabriella had kicked a basket of puppies. "Oh my God, Gabby, relax." It was dark humor. "I thought you still had a sense of humor." That's always the first offense of an inappropriate person. It was a joke. Never I said something stupid. Never sorry. I crossed the line. It's always you who lost your sense of humor. You who misunderstood. You who woke up allergic to jokes. Very convenient. The offender writes the fire and still wants to edit the firefighter's report. After that, Grace started using "our husband" frequently. Graham took out the trash. "Our husband works so hard." Graham made pancakes on Saturday. "Our husband spoils us." Graham fixed the leaky faucet. "Our husband was born to take care of too." Women, Gabriella asked her to stop. She said it was becoming uncomfortable. Grace laughed. "You're jealous of me. I'm basically your sister." Basically her sister, of course. Because every sister looks at her brother-in-law like she's waiting for her turn at the courthouse. Super healthy. Nothing to see here, folks, just a modern family being built with cement made of denial. Graham said Grace was fragile, that it was a phase, that she had lost her marriage, her home, her security, and her plans. And yes, that was true. Grace had suffered. But suffering is not a license to lick the fence around someone else's life. A person can be broken and still be responsible for the glass they scatter on the floor. The weeks turned into months. Grace started joining everything. At first, it was because she felt lonely. Then because she was already there. Then because it didn't make sense for her to eat separately. Eventually, Gabriella and Graham basically stopped having dinners alone. If they planned to go out, Grace would appear dressed up, purse in hand. "You're going to that new restaurant. I love Italian food," Gabriella would say. Actually, it was supposed to be a date for us. Grace would put a hand over her chest. "Sorry, I didn't mean to get in the way. I'll just stay here alone. Don't worry about me. I'm already used to being abandoned." And there it was. Guilt walked into the room, pulled up a chair, and asked for the menu. Graham would look at Gabriella with that poor thing face, and Gabriella would give in. So the three of them went to the restaurant. A non-consensual 3-person couple. The famous love triangle, where one corner is being dragged by the collar. Gabriella also noticed that Grace started going directly to Graham about household things. If they were out of milk, she texted Graham. If the dog needed food, Graham. If the sink made a noise, Graham. If a light flickered, Graham. If the earth kept spinning, Graham. When Gabriella asked why Grace didn't talk to her, Grace replied, "He handles things faster. Look at that delicacy. A slap with a satin glove and poison under the nail." The situation got worse because Gabriella and Graham had been trying to get pregnant for almost a year. Grace knew. She knew about the appointments, the negative tests, the cycle tracking, the fertile days, the crying hidden in the bathroom. She knew everything. And because she knew, she should have been extra careful. But Grace seemed to use her friend's pain as a weak spot, poking it whenever she needed to feel superior. During one dinner, while the three of them were eating, Grace said, "I've always thought some women are born with natural mother energy. Others just seem to like the pretty idea of motherhood more than actual motherhood." Graham froze with his fork in the air. "Grace, that was harsh." "Harsh? That wasn't harsh." That kicked the door open wearing boots and then asked where the master bedroom was. Gabriella stayed quiet for a few seconds, trying to understand if Grace had really said that. Grace noticed the mood and started crying. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean that about you. It's just that I lost everything, including my chance at having a family. And there it was again." Grace threw the rock, then lay down under it and screamed that she was being crushed. An ancient technique used by couch manipulators. Gabriella forgave her, because she still believed Grace was just wounded. And maybe she was. But a wounded snake is still a snake. It just bites while crying. The turning point happened at the birthday party of one of Gabriella's relatives. It was a simple barbecue, family gathered around, people asking about work, pregnancy, the house. That interrogation disguised as affection that every family performs with military precision. One aunt asked Grace if she was already looking for an apartment. Grace laughed. "Why? I'm doing great at Gabby and Graham's house. The three of us have a wonderful dynamic." The aunt frowned. "The three of you?" Grace answered, "It's our little joke. I always say Graham is our husband. He takes care of both of us. Gabriella should be grateful. I'm training him for her silence not comfortable silence. The silence of someone dropping a glass serving dish and everyone waiting to see who will pretend." They didn't notice. Gabriella pulled Grace into the hallway. "You need to stop this now. It's not funny. It's not cute. It's disrespectful." Grace rolled her eyes. "You're making drama out of a joke." Gabriella said, "You called my husband ours in front of my family." Grace smiled. Small and dry. "If I were trying to steal Graham, Gabby, you'd know. And honestly, if I wanted to, I think I already would have." The sentence hung in the air like the smell of spoiled food. Everyone knows it's there, but nobody wants to be the first to say it. Gabriella asked, "What did you just say?" Grace instantly changed her expression. "Oh my God, sarcasm. You're way too sensitive. In the car." Gabriella expected Graham to finally say. That crossed the line, but Graham only sighed. "I think she's in a really bad place emotionally." Gabriella looked at him. "She said she could have you if she wanted." Graham replied. "She said it to provoke you." You know how Grace is ... Yes, Gabriella was beginning to know exactly how Grace was. The problem was that Graham seemed to be reading the book with his eyes closed. Over the next few weeks, Grace became even bolder. She started buying things Graham liked. His favorite cereal, the coffee brand he drank, a specific hot sauce Gabriella didn't even know where to buy. She washed some of his clothes separately because that fabric shrinks. She made sandwiches for him to take to work, even though Gabriella had already prepared lunch. Gabriella asked, "Grace, why are you making food for Graham?" Grace replied, "Because I was making some for myself, there was extra. I didn't realize I needed permission to be kind." People like this turn every boundary into a moral courtroom. You say don't do that, and it becomes so you hate kindness. No, creature. She hates you trying to meal prep for her husband with the scent of emotional trespassing. Grace also started posting stories. A photo of 3 mugs on the table, our little home. Graham building furniture, the man of the house taking care of everything, the dog in her lap. Our improvised family. Gabriella asked her to delete them. "You're making it look like you live in a relationship with us," Grace replied. "You worry too much about what other people think." Translation, I'm building a public narrative and you're being very annoying by noticing. Finally, Gabriella told Graham that Grace had to leave. Not into months. Not when she felt ready. Now, Graham agreed. But asked for delicacy. Delicacy. That wonderful word people use when they want the victim to wear gloves while removing the knife. They sat with Grace in the living room. Gabriella spoke first. "Grace, we love you, but this isn't working. You need to find somewhere else to live." Grace didn't even look at Gabriella. She looked straight at Graham. "Is that what you want?" Graham swallowed. "I think it's best for everyone." Grace tilted her head. "You think, or she thinks." The room went cold. Not air conditioning cold. "Funeral before the priest arrives cold," Graham replied. "We both think so." Grace laughed without humor. "Wow, after everything I've done for you." Gabriella asked, "What exactly did you do for us?" Grace started listing things. She cleaned the kitchen, took care of the dog, kept Graham company when Gabriella worked late, helped Graham when he felt lonely, listened to Graham when he didn't want to worry Gabriella, supported Graham emotionally while Gabriella became obsessed with getting pregnant. And then the word fell on the floor and shattered. Gabriella turned to Graham. "You talked to her about that." Graham turned red. "Sometimes. I was worried about you. I didn't know how to help." Grace crossed her arms. He needed someone who didn't turn everything into pressure, of course. Grace, savior of the poor husband oppressed by the wife dealing with infertility. Saint Grace of inappropriate cousins. Patron saint of women who enter other people's marriages through the laundry room door. Gabriella said, "You weren't helping. You were putting yourself between us," Grace replied. "Maybe I stepped in because there was space." That sentence hit Gabriella harder than she wanted to admit. Because it was cruel, because it was poisonous, and because Graham did not answer immediately, Gabriella gave Grace weeks to leave. From that moment on, the campaign began. Grace messaged mutual friends saying Gabriella was throwing out a divorced woman because of jealousy. That she and Graham had a real emotional connection. That Gabriella was controlling. That marriage shouldn't be a prison. That Grace had never tried to replace anyone. Only exist inside a family that had also welcomed her. Exist inside a family. What an elegant way to say I'm trying to get into the picture and crop the wife out of the frame. A friend named Giselle sent screenshots to Gabriella. In one group chat, Grace wrote, "Graham understands me, and I understand him. It's not sexual, before anyone freaks out. But it is emotional. And maybe that scares Gabriella because she knows she can't give him everything." Gabriella showed Graham. He looked scared, but also defensive. "I never said it like that." Gabriella replied, "But did you say it in some way?" Graham went silent, and that silence was basically a confession wearing comfortable shoes. Later, Gabriella asked to see the messages between Graham and Grace. Graham hesitated, which was already an answer with smoke coming out of it. Then he handed her the phone. There was nothing explicitly sexual. No photos, no direct declarations. But there was a sticky, soft, and appropriate intimacy. Grace wrote, "Is she angry today? You look tired. I wish I could give you peace. You deserve to be cared for too. Sometimes I feel like I walked into the wrong life. Do you think, in another situation, we would have been inevitable?" Graham replied, "Don't talk like that. You're important to us. I like having you here. You understand me in a different way. I just want everyone to be okay." Yes, the classic "I just want everyone to be okay." Usually said by someone holding a hose pointed at the wrong house while his own kitchen burns. Graham wasn't having a physical affair, but he was feeding an emotional fire with little sticks of validation. Gabriella said, "You let her believe she had a chance." Graham replied, "I didn't want to hurt her." Gabriella laughed, but it was ugly, joyless laughter. "So you preferred hurting your wife." That finally went in. Slowly, because some truths need an elevator, a badge, and authorization to pass through the mind of a man who thinks he's a good guy. But it went in. Grace left on Sunday. She cried. She hugged Graham for too long. Gabriella had to say, "Enough." Grace left the letter on the table. Of course she did. Dramatic people don't end situations. They released season finales. In the letter, she said Gabriella had chosen fear over love, possession over trust, jealousy over empathy. She said Graham was a rare man and deserved to be seen fully. She said Grace had never wanted to steal anything, only offer a broader form of love, beautiful, poetic. Also known as, "I want your husband, but I learned therapy vocabulary." Gabriella posted on our relationship_advice asking if she was exaggerating, if she should try to repair the friendship, if Graham had only been naive, or if she was right to feel that something deeply wrong had happened. In the comments, Reddit opened the toolbox and started taking the situation apart to see where the insanity was leaking. One comment said, "Grace wasn't living in your house. She was doing an internship to become your replacement." Another, "Graham liked the attention and now wants to pretend he tripped and fell into 8 months of emotional intimacy." Another one, "When someone calls your husband ours, the correct response isn't laughter. It's asking where she bought that audacity wholesale." Gabriella answered some questions. Yes, Grace was alone with Graham when Gabriella worked late. Yes, Graham and Grace had long kitchen conversations after Gabriella went to bed. Yes, Grace knew details about Gabriella's fertility treatment that Gabriella never would have shared if she had known Graham was using her best friend as a human diary. One comment asked, "Did Grace have access to calendars, passwords, or personal information?" Gabriella realized yes. Grace had access to the shared household calendar because she had once taken the dog to the vet. She knew appointment times, trips, Graham's meetings, Gabriella's work shifts. She also knew the old password to the house tablet because she used it to watch shows. And now, hold on to this next step because the staircase is turning into a cliff. Today's after the post. Giselle called Gabriella. Giselle's voice sounded strange, low, like someone who had found something she wished she hadn't. Grace was temporarily staying at Giselle's house. At first, she just seemed sad. She cried, said she had lost another family, and claimed Gabriella was cruel. Giselle tried to be understanding, until Grace asked for help making Graham see the truth without Gabriella filtering everything. Giselle asked, "What truth?" Grace opened her laptop to show some text she was writing. Giselle saw a folder called Project Home, because apparently trying to wedge yourself into someone else's marriage now comes with a startup. Name. Inside were screenshots of conversations with Graham, notes on the household routine, details about what Graham liked, foods, music, times when he was most vulnerable, phrases he used when he was tired, records of arguments between Gabriella and Graham, and even notes about Gabriella's fertility. One file was called How to Talk to Gabby Without Seeming Like a Threat. Another, Marriage Tension Points. Another, Expanded Family Possibilities. Giselle was horrified. She discreetly took photos and sent them to Gabriella. Gabriella read them while sitting on the kitchen floor. Her hands were shaking, because one thing is suspecting someone was trying to steal space in your life. Another is discovering that person made a map of your emotional house with a legend, alternate routes, and an invasion plan. In the document, Grace wrote that Gabriella was territorial, that Graham was emotionally neglected, that trying to conceive had turned Gabriella into someone focused only on her own body, and that Grace represented lightness, care, and presence. She described their marriage as a closed system in need of oxygen. This woman tried to become an emotional affair partner and called it ventilation. Giselle also found a drafty mail to Graham. I know we promised not to name this, but I can't keep pretending that what exists between us is just friendship. She will never accept it because she needs to be chosen alone. I don't want to destroy anything. I want to build something where everyone can breathe, promised. Gabriella confronted Graham that night. He went pale. He said he had never promised anything. He said that months earlier. Grace had cried and said she felt like part of the family and asked if that was wrong. Graham had replied that she was family to them. He had also said, in one very unfortunate conversation, that not everything needs to be named. There it is. Grace took that sentence, put a ring on it, and moved into the building. Gabriella said, you may not have promised it the way she wrote it, but you gave her enough material to build a fantasy. Graham cried, apologized, said he liked being admired, said he felt powerless watching Gabriella suffer over not getting pregnant, said Grace made him feel needed, competent, good. Gabriella replied, you wanted to feel like a hero, and you let my best friend turn me into the villain. That sentence hit Graham like a wet brick. They started couples therapy with Dr. Gallagher in the first session. Graham tried to explain that he didn't see malice. Dr. Gallagher asked, do you realize that by avoiding setting boundaries with Grace, so you wouldn't hurt her, you transferred all the hurt onto Gabriella? Graham stayed quiet. Dr. Gallagher continued, kindness without boundaries can become cowardice wearing nice perfume. Thank you, Dr. Gallagher. Finally, someone put a label on the bottle. Graham blocked Grace. He sent a formal message saying the relationship had become inappropriate, that he took responsibility for allowing too much closeness, but that he wanted no contact. He asked her not to contact Gabriella, him, or any family members. Grace replied 27 times before being blocked. Everywhere, 27, because. Apparently do not contact me meant start a limited series to her. The messages range from pleading to accusation. You're letting her control you. You know I know you. I never lied about what I felt. She's going to punish you until you disappear. You promise I was family. Family doesn't discard family. Family. That word being exploited harder than a retail worker in December. Gabriella thought the worst had passed. Naive. In stories like this, the worst never passes. It just changes clothes. A week later, Gabriella went to the fertility clinic for an appointment. She was exhausted, emotionally drained, trying to gather enough dignity to sit in a room full of old magazines and hope wrapped in plastic. When she entered the waiting room, she saw Grace sitting near the window, holding a coffee. Grace smiled. Hi, Gabby. Gabriella froze. What are you doing here? Grace said, I'm here with a friend. There was no friend. No friend appeared. The friend was probably a spiritual entity named Lai. Gabriella later went to the receptionist and discovered that Grace had tried to confirm the appointment time by saying she was Gabriella's sister. Sister? How convenient. She was already basically a sister when she wanted access to the husband. Now, she became an administrative sister to try to breach medical privacy. Gabriella went back to Grace and said, you need to leave. Grace replied, I just wanted to talk without Graham in the middle. You're turning everything into war. Gabriella said, you showed up at my fertility clinic. Grace tilted her head. Maybe you need to ask why you're so afraid of one conversation. Maybe because you know you're trying to get pregnant to trap a man who is already emotionally left. And then, for the first time, Gabriella didn't yell. She didn't cry. She didn't give Grace the spectacle she wanted. She just took out her phone, took a picture of her in the waiting room, and said, thank you. This is going to the lawyer. It's amazing how people who talk about spiritual connection lose their enlightenment. When they hear the word lawyer, Gabriella filed a harassment report. The clinic blocked all access to her information. Graham was horrified. He said he had no idea Grace would go that far. Gabriella replied, that far started when you thought it was cute that she called you her husband. Ouch, truth with the vinegar aftertaste. Then Gavin, Grace's ex-husband, appeared. He messaged Gabriella and said, I know you probably hate me, and you're right to, but she's done this before. Gavin said that before the divorce. Grace had developed a similar obsession with Grant, his best friend. She called Grant her backup husband as a joke. She said the three of them had alternative family energy. She started messaging Grant whenever she fought with Gavin, when Grant pulled away. Grace accused Gavin of controlling her friendships. Gavin said he had cheated, yes, and he wasn't trying to look innocent. But he wanted Gabriella to know this pattern existed before anyone gives Gavin a medal. Calm down. A cheater trying to be useful is still a cheater. It's like a rat warning you about termites. The information might be true, but nobody wants to hug the rat. Still, the information mattered. Grace wasn't just suffering. She had a script. She changed the cast but kept the play. Gabriella sent the screenshots to Gemma, Grant's fiancée. After Gemma contacted her saying Grace had started messaging Grant again, Grace was saying Gabriella was defaming her, that Graham had fallen in love with her, and that everyone abandoned her when she loved too much. Love too much. What a dangerous phrase. Some people call obsession love because it looks better in a caption. Gemma thanked her, blocked Grace, and warned Grant. Giselle also cut contact. The friend group split. Some still said Grace needed compassion. Gabriella replied, I had compassion. She tried to turn compassion into a co-marriage agreement. 0 mistakes. Print that on tile. Gabriella's final update said she and Graham were still together, but rebuilding. There was no magical forgiveness, no soundtrack, no hug in the rain. Graham was sleeping in the guest room for a while, ironically in the same room that caused the whole soap opera. The house had become a museum of consequences. Graham admitted to family and some friends that he had allowed inappropriate emotional intimacy. He said he failed Gabriella by prioritizing Grace's discomfort over his wife's safety. He also agreed to individual therapy because, apparently, needing to be admired by a woman in crisis so badly that you ignore your own life isn't just being kind, it's a problem factory wearing a good guy t-shirt. Grace did not take it well. She created an anonymous Reddit account to tell her side, but, of course, she gave too many details. She mentioned the clinic, the house, that expanded love, the phrase our husband, and the infamous Project Home, which she tried to defend as a therapeutic journal for family integration. Emotional colonization now has a Sunday workshop name. Reddit recognized the story and came down on her like a rain of bricks. One comment said, "You didn't want an expanded family. You wanted to expand your hand towards someone else's wedding ring." Another, "You showed up at his wife's fertility clinic. That isn't love. That's stalking with lip gloss." Another, "Project Home. Girl, that's not a therapeutic journal. That's an invasion manual in Calibri font." Grace deleted the post in less than an hour. But screenshots live longer than cockroaches in the apocalypse. Everything reached Gabriella. Gabriella didn't respond. For the first time, she chose not to feed the fire. She said she was focused on herself, her marriage, her health, and figuring out whether she still wanted to have a child with Graham after everything. Because that is also a fair question. Loving someone isn't enough. You have to trust that they won't open the door of your emotional home to the first needy person with a blowout who says, "You understand me?" in the comments on the original post. Most people were direct. Gabriella was not wrong. Grace crossed boundaries repeatedly, consciously, and in terrifying ways. Graham may not have physically cheated, at least there was no proof. But he participated in emotional betrayal through omission, vanity, and weakness. And yes, there is a difference between being manipulated and enjoying the manipulation because it massages your ego. The narrator's final judgment is simple. Gabriella gets 0 out of 5 buttholes. Maybe she took too long to act. But delay is not guilt when you're trying to believe your best friend isn't setting up camp inside your marriage. Sometimes a person sees smoke and thinks it's fog because imagining a fire inside their own house hurts too much. Graham gets out of 5 buttholes. Not because Grace wanted him, that isn't his fault. But because he liked feeling needed. Because he confused the absence of sexual intent with innocence. Because he let Grace turn his house into a stage and Gabriella into the antagonist. He didn't open a motel, but he opened an emotional VIP lounge and forgot to tell his wife. Grace gets 5 out of 5 buttholes, with an extra trophy shaped like a guest room key. Because calling your friend's husband ours, creating a strategy folder, showing up at a fertility clinic, and still trying to sell it as expanded love is a level of delusion that should come with the siren. And the friends who defended Grace get half a butthole each. Because compassion without sense becomes a moving service for manipulators. Someone enters your house crying. You offer a couch, she tries to take your husband, and someone still says, "But poor thing. She's suffering." Yes, sweetheart, and the alligator might also be sad. But I'm not putting my leg in its mouth to comfort it. The moral of this story? When someone starts calling your husband ours and you never sign any agreement to share a husband, house, dog, and trauma, don't laugh to be polite. Ask immediately, "Are who?" Because sometimes the person is joking, but sometimes they're testing the lock. And when you take too long to change the key, they're already inside choosing their side of the bed. Now, I want to know what you think. Did Gabriella do the right thing by kicking Grace out and cutting her off completely? Or was Graham the real problem for letting the story grow while pretending it was just kindness? Because honestly, if someone tries to share your marriage without an invitation, the only fair thing to divide is the distance.